Okay, I'm doing a lot of videos about Karl Marx and his Marxist government politics and philosophy and such. In this video, I pretty much want to talk about Marx's idea of ideology, as well as get into the opinion of ideology of a Marxist following Marx by the name of Louis Althusser, who was a French Marxist. Among the Marxists following Marx, we have Lukács, Althusser, Gramsci, I think is what his name is, like the guy who got put in prison, who got put in prison, and had a bunch of notes that he wrote in prison about that and stuff like that. Hopefully, I'll get to read that one. I've been reading Lukács and a little bit of Althusser as well. So, first of all, I'll start with Marx. Now, I have a lot of videos about Marx. I've talked a lot about the whole bourgeois proletarian kind of thing. We have the proletarian, who's the guy who does the labor, does the work, produces stuff within the company, and gets paid minimally for it. And he has to do that. He's kind of in a bit of a obligatory situation where he has to be doing that in order to support his family and support himself. Then we have the bourgeois, who own the means and modes of production, and who basically own the means. They basically own everything, and they try to maximize profit or maximize surplus, and try to actually either get at or make as much commodity or capital or money as possible through the idea of fetishism via Marx. And pretty much it's a bit of a exploitative relation where the bourgeois exploits the proletarian by trying to maximize productivity and make more profit and make more surplus, while paying the proletarians as least as they possibly can. So it's alienation or estrangement, in that the labor, the work that one does is a part of who he is. It's the essence of a man, and that stuff is immediately being owned by the bourgeois. The product he makes, and the labor he puts into it, immediately going to the bourgeois. That's what alienation is, and that's how we can kind of relate that to existentialist thought of Sartre and Heidegger and de Beauvoir and Camus and others. So how does it relate to ideology? First of all, Marx had this thought about ideology as being superstructural or superstructured. We have the economic base. The economic base is thought it has two things. It has the productive forces and the relations of production. The productive forces are the materials to produce, thus like the resources, the raw materials and such. The relations of production, like between people and families and such, that those two things together are the economic base. And the way people think, the people who are a part of this economic base of the relations of production, the way people think, according to Marx, sheds light on the superstructure of the capitalist ideology. So Marx thought that every place is unique, in that every place has the way people think. There's a certain different way that people think based on where they live. Marx's historical materialism kind of has an emphasis on figuring out how ideas and the world relate, and that's where talk about ideology comes from. Marx's writing called I think Engels was on this too, Friedrich Engels. It's called the German Ideology. It's pretty neat book to read, I would say. Pretty neat writing of his. So, what is the superstructure? Talking about laws, cultures, habits, customs, religion, governments. That it causes this whole ideology to be the way it is. And according to Marx, it's the dominant ideology is the ideas of the ruling class. Thus, in capitalism, in capitalism, how we have the bourgeois who own everything and the proletarians who do the actual work. The bourgeois are the ruling class, of course, and they own everything and they rule everything. And there's this dominating class, which there's a dominating ideology to keep things that way, to keep the proletarians in their place, and to keep things this way. But according to Marx, his dialectical thought process of how things work from Hegel, we have a thesis, an antithesis, and a synthesis, where we have a thing being said, a contradictory thing being said, and then a synthesis or a sublation, which is a bit of a compromise between the two, where we have change and conflict and contradiction, which leads to a certain kind of social progress. And also, because of the crisis of capitalism, because there's crisis in capitalism because of how the bourgeois are going to want to maximize productivity and decrease the wages given, and try to get materials for less from other companies, and expect other companies to pay their workers more, and just try to do whatever they can. This fetishism to get at money and get more capital, get more commodities, and thus there would be, as the class struggles, and as the bourgeois try to get more and more at the money and at the capital and commodity, and as the proletarians get more and more dissatisfied, that leads to a revolution, a overthrowing of the current thought processes and the current government, the current ideology. So, that's Marx. Marx believed that every single place was unique, and that there was a connection via the way the world is and the way people's ideas are. Also, what was I going to say? Althusser was very different in that regard, though. Capitalism was different. It was a different kind of thing. In that, this is kind of a worse animal with a worse ideology than any of the other ones. The dominating ideology is worse, and it's just a worse thing that kind of stays that way. And Marx's his communistic government was kind of the thing that would, socialism is what would first result after the revolution, and thus full communism would thereafter come into effect. And that actually, in a way, it happened with the Tsar of Russia, where everybody was starving and stuff with the famine, and basically the Tsar got overthrown because people were unhappy. And I don't recall from history that was a capitalist, or it was I don't know. I'm not that good at Russian history before the USSR period. So also, finally, what is important about Marx's view of ideology is that since we can look at the economic base and look at the way people think, and that can shed some light on the superstructure, and we can gain more knowledge of the superstructure, and we can gain more knowledge of it, and figure out what can be done to dismantle it. While Althusser, good books to read by him is Reading Capital for Marx, and he has a essay which is in quite a few anthologies of critical and social theory, which is called Ideology and Ideological State Apparatuses, or ISAs. First we have ISAs and we have RSAs. On ideological state apparatus is an apparatus that is of a certain place, that is there because of religion, family, government, a certain overriding idea that stays there because of a certain faction or affiliation or something like that. Althusser goes into pretty good detail of what could cause a certain ideological state apparatus to form over that place. Now, an RSA is a repressive state apparatus. Now, in the way that for Marx, the bourgeois is the dominating class over the proletarian, the repressive state apparatus is the way that a certain something like the state or something could repressively and oppressively and exploitatively keep a certain ideology in place for a certain purpose following that. Now, for Marx, ideology, we can talk about ideologies over certain places and be true or false. Thus, we can have a false consciousness. Now, I could talk a lot about false consciousness about a certain ideology or what's causing a certain thing to be. For Althusser, there's no true false bivalency or bivalence about ideology. We can't have knowledge about ideology. Ideologies aren't discovered; they're produced. The way we think is what produces them. Man produces them. Now, there's no superstructure for that. We look for Althusser. We look at ideology via a practical social function. Thus, we can't have false consciousness. We can't think of it in a false or true way. It's not falsifiable. It's something that is everywhere, and just like Marx, he thinks that way. But in that way, the whole main thing that is different is that he doesn't think ideology can be something that we can know about or discover. So that's mostly basically a brief way of talking about that. So in a way, I would have to agree with Althusser in that I think that there isn't a kind of superstructural element. I think it mostly is something that we can produce and thus we can tear down and dismantle. So I think that I pretty much agree with Althusser. So if you think I've messed something up or left something out, please comment below. Also, if you have a question, comment below as well. So, thank you.